right, here we go. Hey everyone, this is Dr. Mark Schillinger, founder of the nonprofit Young Men's Ultimate Weekend. The YMUW, or Young Men's Ultimate Weekend, is a wilderness rite of passage event for young men ages 13 to 20. And thousands of young men from all different economic, social, racial, and academic backgrounds have graduated from our event. And by rite of passage, I just simply mean this. It's an event that signals that it's time for young men to realize that they can't primarily act like boys anymore. It's time for them to act like young men and get ready for the challenges of the adult world. So they learn to think for themselves. They learn about problem solving and how to deal with stress and how to work in teams and how to set goals. And this is all done through so many devoted and highly skilled mentors who teach them what they need to know to make it out there in the world. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to two close friends of mine, two colleagues, two dudes that I just love very much. They've taught me a lot about how to be with young men, Ashanti Branch and Warren Farrell. Ashanti's been a longtime volunteer at YMUW. Warren has written the book, The Boy Crisis, and so many other books dedicated to men and women and parents and children having great relationships. Even though we've worked together in all different settings, we've rarely had the time to just sit down and talk about, you know, what we do and what we're passionate about. So that's really the purpose of this Zoom call, is just to have a conversation about a number of topics that I think you'll find really interesting, whether you're a parent or a mentor, a teacher, a coach, or even a young man. So let's begin. Ashanti, please take a moment to say hello. Then Warren, feel free to jump in, and then we'll get started.
All right.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Ashanti Branch, and I'm here recording today for three young men. And I'm here recording for Rafael Medrano, a young man who I mentored, who unfortunately took his own life in 2016. For Arturo Guevara, who was killed in 2018. And for Dante Sloan, who in 2020 died due to COVID. And so I stand on the opportunity to serve young men in this work, and I'm glad to be here. I'm sure we'll get into more of the story, but I just wanted to start by saying I'm here in honor of those three young men who I'm really feeling right now as we talk about young men. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Warren Farrell, and I've been writing about boys and men's issues and women's issues since the late 1960s, and started out on the board of directors of the National Organization for Women in New York City, speaking all over the world on behalf of women's issues, and hope I did a little bit of pioneering work in that area. And then as I began to see that boys and men were falling behind and were being misunderstood, or there was sort of anger toward them, I started to try to figure out what was the vulnerability behind that anger. And as I started to look into that, and I formed some 300 men's groups, and the men, once they started to feel that there was safety and confidentiality in those men's groups, started opening up more and more, and I began to see their vulnerability, and I began to feel much differently about men in my father's generation, and recognizing the sacrifices that they made, and that that the term being entitled and privileged was not the way my father saw himself, and not the way his father saw himself. And so I started to try to have equal compassion for both men and women, and started to engage in the absolutely fruitless effort of getting men and women to understand each other. But at least it was a lifetime of full employment.
Well, I want to say, certainly about Warren. Warren and I have been on a men's team together for, I think it's 10 years now. And I just love his work. He's invited me to assist him sometimes, and I learn so much. So thank you for all the work that you're doing. It's really great work, and every family should know all the things that you know. It'd be a different world if that was the case.
Thank you, Mark.
Absolutely. All right, so let's begin. And I was thinking about, for days, like, how do I begin a conversation with you guys? And then it just kind of popped into my head recently, which is sort of begin with a question and just see how the three of us relate to it, with the intention of discovering are young men really that much different than the way we were when we were younger, and maybe even throughout history. So what I'm gonna ask you to consider is this question, which is like, when you guys, and when I was back in high school, like, what were we thinking? What were you guys thinking about? Like, how did you relate to politics and economic leadership and the state of the world? Did you even think about that? How did you relate to the world? Not so much about like your, maybe your friends or whatever. I mean, just more the bigger picture, because I want this conversation to go somewhere, and it really begins with us revealing how we were when we were young men, because we worked with them so much. What did you guys think about? How did you relate to it all then?
Ashanti?
Yeah, thank you. I was on the newspaper. So I was on the school newspaper. So I was a photographer. So we had newspapers delivered every morning. Our first assignment was to read the paper. So I think as much as I wasn't into politics, I was constantly like ingesting what was going on in the world from 3 different sources of newspapers, that were all that we had to read. It was part of our assignments, but also it was like, wow, I know a lot. Like, so when I talk to teachers, so I think that in terms of my community, I grew up in Oakland, California. It was a rough community. So I knew a lot about the history and the stories in my neighborhoods and friends and, some really difficult times. But I wasn't really into politics much. I was really into a lot more of like, I was on my way to college. So I was like, just trying to do all the work I could to get out of Oakland so I could go away. I just knew that I had a journey to make. But I had no rites of passage. I was not a part. I didn't have a mentor. I was kind of operating like a lone wolf. And I learned in those processes that you can't really talk to anybody. You can't trust too many people. You can't tell people definitely what you're feeling. And definitely in a community like Oakland, it was like talking about your feelings could get you into fights. And, I was a big dude, but I don't really like to fight. So I just keep it to myself. So I think that all of that, I was kind of like more insular. I was like more of an academic and, for my high school years. And I definitely didn't talk about feelings like at all. Like, so when I created the idea of creating a program for young men, it was because I knew I needed it. I didn't know it at the time why I was creating it. But now as I look back, I'm like, I was creating what I needed. So yeah, that's how I was in middle school and high school. I mean, I was an athlete and but I was more of a studious student. Yeah.
That's you, Warren.
Yeah, let's see. I think I became aware of the world a fair amount in the 8th grade, 7th grade. I began in 7th grade. I was surprised when I was elected class president and in a number of responsible positions. And I suddenly realized that maybe I had sort of some sense of leadership or potential for leadership. And then in the 8th grade, a little bit with that awareness, the McCarthy era was surfacing, and I was saying, why don't we listen to what the Soviet and the communists have to say? We don't have to be communists or Soviets, but we should listen at least. And people were looking at me like, something is wrong with you. Are you a communist? And that type of thing. And I grew up in a relatively conservative working class community. So even the hint of suggesting that we should listen to our side, but also listen to the other side, I could feel the beginning of ostracism be born into my psyche. But then in the later in the 8th grade, early 9th grade, my father got a job working as a manager in the Netherlands, and so the family moved over to the Hague in Holland, and so I went to an international school in the Hague, but I had a number of friends who were Dutch, and when I mentioned these things to them, they all went, yeah, of course. The United States is a bully nation, and the Soviet Union is a bully nation. You guys have you have more in common than you do different. It's the follower nations like us that have other things in common. And so it was a really turning point for me, because I felt all the things that were creating ostracism for me in my local school were things that really were of value. That I could see that I had some insights that if I just allowed myself to trust them, that maybe somewhere somebody else would see that they were of value. And that combined with living overseas for a year and a half and living in Paris for 4 months by myself with just some French and English people, gave me a broader view of the world than I might otherwise have had if I hadn't been fortunate enough to have that experience. And when I came back, I started to be even more, focused on leading and things like that, and became high school student body president. But still, underneath it all, I was, I was a bit of a lone wolf also, and I never fit into any group in college, never joined a fraternity, and so I was sort of always felt sort of differently than the people who had support networks. And so that felt sad to me and also good to me, but 2/3 sad and 1/3 good.
I'm hearing a little bit of a theme, like, you both had that lone wolf, kind of relationship to it all. And for me, it's very similar, and I'll then relate that to, I think, what's happening, or we could all talk about what's happening with young men now. But for me, like, I was the kind of young man growing up in Queens and back in the 50s where, it was pretty hardcore. I had loving parents, loving neighborhood, really, but it was hardcore, like, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be an attorney, you're going to do something, it's going to be big, you're going to make money, you got to go achieve. Mm-hmm. And for me, where I felt like I was the lone wolf was like, I didn't feel that drive. I didn't sense that. I was always that guy, like, literally looking up at the sky and going like, is there a God? Where are you? I'm going to find you. I want to know. Don't hide from me. I just felt like everything was a great mystery. And I felt so much self-doubt back as a teenager that I couldn't relate to hardly anything. I mean, I saw, like, brutal killings going on in the city, or, the Kennedy killings and, Martin Luther King. I just felt like the world didn't care about me. And I certainly didn't think it really cared much about anything other than whatever the politicians or the money people decided. Mm-hmm. So there was that part of me too, like lone wolf, where I felt like the adults don't really get me. Mm-hmm. I had some friends, and certainly, in my house I did. I felt like they got me, but after that, I didn't feel safe at all.
Yes.
So the reason why I'm bringing that up is because I wanted to tie that into, like, were we really that much different than the way young men think now? And that's going to kind of lead us into this whole conversation. But I know for me, when I mentor young men, because as you know, that's what I do. I mentor young men and I coach parents. I'm finding young men now to be very passionless. Like for you, Warren, I know in your book you talk about, there's a purpose void, that we need to have young men doing things that are meaningful for them. And as a personal growth expert, I totally agree with you. And yet I'm finding that the young men these days are kind of passionless. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I certainly wasn't. I get that you were an Ashanti, you wanted to get off to school and get out of the hood in a certain way and do good for yourself. And certainly for you, Warren, the experiences you had, you weren't that passionless. You might have felt Lone Ranger like I did and Ashanti did, but we had a certain drive.
Yes, absolutely.
So I'm kind of seeing that disappearing. And where I'd like to begin this conversation is sort of what I'm observing, which is this. At the Young Men's Weekend, I've been with thousands of young men, right? I hear what they say. When I'm mentoring here in my office, I hear what they say. And basically, they really seem to be fed up with all of the rules their parents have, the rules the culture has, the rules the school have, right? So in my work, we've come up with this expression like conformity over authenticity is anarchy. And I'm saying that because I think the young men now feel like everything is about the outer world and there's not enough about the inner world. Like, who are they? What do they really have to say? And I know that sounds ridiculous because there's, social media and all these things they get a chance to put out there, but I'm sensing that there's some sort of disconnect, that they're either withdrawing greatly or, acting out and being really intense and disrespectful to their parents and violent, actually, which we all know. So I just wanted to jump in with that. Like, how do you see young men in your work with them? You know, they're great kids. I see them. They're wonderful. And they just seem to be thinking that they're going to live home forever. They'll play their games forever. I know I'm generalizing, but, and that'll go on forever.
Yes.
So I wanted to sort of hear how you're relating to how you're interacting with young men, and what are you finding?
Yes. Ashanti?
Yeah. Let me go first. Yeah, you know, we had a social emotional leadership academy this summer. So we had a club in middle school that we were working with. When everything school shut down, we were like trying to get them all together. And I have this one picture I took of like a Zoom room with like 10 people, and it's me, the mentor, and then one young man. And everybody else has the black screens with their name. And you're like, where are you all at? Like, come on. And what we learned from the middle schoolers first, and then I learned again in the summer with the high schoolers, there's just so much extra that they have to worry about. I think that what I didn't have to worry about somebody saying something about me and 10,000 people hearing it before I even heard that they said it about me, and then trying to like fix the drama that's happening. Like normally it's like one person tells one person and then one person, and then you get to school, like 5 people have heard it, and then they come to you. And I mean, that was the social media back then. It was like you tell somebody, they tell somebody, you tell somebody like that. Now I don't have to talk. I can actually pretend I'm somebody else who's saying it. It's just so much extra. And I think that what we saw with the middle schoolers is that if you don't have a very high self-worth, a self-value, self-esteem, to sit all day looking at yourself in this box can be a little bit overwhelming, especially if you don't like, appreciate, love what you see. And I think that whenever in our time have we ever had to go to meetings all day where we have to look at ourselves? Normally we're just looking at other people. So I think for a lot of our young men, as much as, you know, we don't think young men are worried about how they look, you've never had to be like looking at yourself all day long. Like I realized the other day when I had my assistant take a picture of me, the campaign manager, I told her to take a picture of me because I was like super nice. We had this new background, and I was gonna post it that night. And I get home to post it because she had my camera, and I look at it and I'm like, you took the wrong picture. Like, can't you see what I see? Because literally 2 inches behind this screen, there's a pile of stuff that you can't see. There's multiple piles of stuff on this desk behind here. And what I realized was that's what happened with our young people. We see what they let us see, but how much stuff is happening like right there or right there or right over there or right that is causing them to be like, what are people going to say about me? What are they going to think about me? What are they going to? So I think it's a judgment that I see with young people, the worry of how many, definitely with not only social media, but just their lives now, it's always on. And if you're not on a device, then people are like, what you mean you ain't got no phone? What you mean you don't have Instagram? What you mean? Like, because if you don't have one, you're like nobody. It's almost like the way some communities have treated it. And therefore, if you get on it and no one likes your stuff, now what does that mean? Well, no one likes you. You're not important. You're not invaluable if you get locked into that value system. And I think that's just so much more than I ever had to worry about it in that way. I worried about people liking me, but you know, I see them. And if I didn't get invited to the party that was on Friday night, I found out Monday morning. So, you know, but now it's Friday night. I'm seeing people at the party who I know. Like I see pictures of people at the party dancing. Like, why am I not there? Now I got 3 days to make up some stories about how much I'm not valuable, I'm not worthy, I'm not important. And on Monday, no matter what people say, I'm going to validate what I've already believed about myself in those days while I was wondering why I didn't get invited. I think it's just so much extra to worry about that our young people that we underestimate. So that's what I'm seeing with young people. It's just they don't talk about it, and they don't feel like they can be heard when they're feeling those things because their parents are like, don't worry about it. Don't worry you didn't get invited to the party. Just get over it.
Yeah.
But
in my work, I like to call that the Great Withdrawal. You know, the parents are like, where did my good boy go? He turned 12 or 13. He's gone. He's just withdrawn. And, you know, for me, I'm relating it to my expression, you know, conformity over authenticity, because I feel like they're being overwhelmed with rules and don't know who they are. And I'm hearing you say that they have, you know, other stressors as well, you know, because of the devices. Warren, how do you sort of weigh in on this as far as, what are you seeing with young men?
Well, I think that you mentioned before that in the Boy Crisis book, I talk about the purpose void. And so the purpose void I see happening in a huge way to almost a whole multiple generations recently of boys. And let me just explain that, because this is sort of like compassion for what every boy is going through. And in the old days, there used to be a really strong sense of purpose for boys. You grew up and you learned to be a man. And to be a man, you had to be disposable in that nation's war. Every generation had its war. And so if you were, grew up in the years ago, it was like, the Nazis are going to potentially invade and we have to resist that. And if you go to war, like Uncle Joe, who's in the Marines, you will be respected. And even though he died, we think of him as a hero. And a boy learned that the way that I can be loved and respected, even if I die, is to serve, die for our country, die to protect women and children and the next generation. And that felt like a worthwhile cause. And the good news is we have a much smaller percentage of males needed as soldiers. The bad news is that sense of automatic purpose is disappeared for a lot of boys in that part. But there was other ways for boys to have purpose too. Another way was to be a sole breadwinner. And in those days, women as a rule who were married didn't work. And so you had to, so the man knew that when children were born, especially, his job was to go out there and figure out how to be willing to give up the jobs that he loved, like being a musician or an elementary school teacher, and take jobs that made more money. He intuitively understood, with nobody telling him, that the most fulfilling work pays the least. The more the less fulfilling work, like selling product X or picking up garbage if you don't have an education, that paid more for people of equivalent education. And but boys working at the hazardous jobs with less education, they were much more likely to die sooner. So it was a different form of disposability. And then there was a third form of disposability for the sole breadwinner, which was what the Japanese called karoshi. Karoshi is Japanese for death at the desk or death from overwork. And so millennials in Japan today have a game that's extremely popular called karoshi. And each person gets a karoshi figure and they compete to go up the ladder, to be the first person to be the winner, to get to the top of the corporate ladder. And the person who is the winner commits suicide, not in reality, but in the game. Mm-hmm. And it's the millennials' way of saying the old male, the traditional male who had to be the sole breadwinner, who told himself that he was all powerful for getting to the top of the corporate ladder, is actually doing the equivalent of committing suicide. It's the Japanese young male's way of understanding that the way that we learn to define power in those purpose days was feeling obligated to earn money that someone else spent while we died sooner. So, and that type of, that existed, and the good news was there was purpose. The bad news was it was purpose by being in a prison of earning money that somebody else spent while we died sooner. Now, today, there's a much different demographic. Every boy has to deal with, like, what is the purpose of doing what my father did? Or, and do I really want to be married and have children and be more imprisoned in this experience? And so what we have then is a different family setup. And one part of that family setup is children born to women who have not been married. So 53% of women under 30 in the United States have children without being married. And usually in that configuration, the father is only around for a maximum of 3 years. That's even in the small percentage of that 53% who live with a man and aren't married. The others don't even know who their father is. The other group is in children of divorce. And with the more societies survived, the more there was an opportunity for children to be, likelihood that the children would be the family would be able to rather have permission to have a divorce without being disgraced. But the boys who were the product of divorce had no father figure, had no male role model. Both boys and girls tended to suffer a great deal. And there tended to be a very core ingredient that dads tend to bring that leads to an enormous distinction between dad-enriched children and dad-deprived children. Dad-enriched children tend to have much more boundary enforcement, tough love, where the father's input into an involved father's input into the home is to do things like wrestle, have fun with them, create a bond, but then use the leverage of that bond to say, you can't push your sister or brother aside. You have to be empathetic to them. You have to understand the distinction between being assertive versus aggressive. I'm not okay with you doing the roughhousing with you until you finish your homework and brush your teeth and let me see your homework. And if you don't do it, I'm sorry, there's no roughhousing tonight, or something else is taken from them. Dads are very comfortable with that, and with that, whereas moms tend to be much more protective and fearful that the child will be upset. And so when that boundary enforcement occurs, those children tend to have postponed gratification. The children with postponed gratification tend to do better in school, better in sports, and they tend to get more approval from teachers, from girls. The boys tend to get more approval from girls, from their male peers, and they notice their parents at home talking proudly of them, but maybe not their brother or sister. And so that allows the kids to say, rules are okay because rules for me are okay because I succeed at those rules. They're angry at the people who aren't okay with the rules because they just want to get away with doing whatever they want to do and having no price to pay for it. So the anarchist, the non-rule person, tends to be the person who doesn't think about anyone but himself and doesn't want any rules constraining him. And the person without the dad helping him get that postponed gratification tends to be most angry at people who are making the rules.
Okay, so I thank you. That's a huge answer, but I get how you tied it together. It's really important, that if there's meaning to the rules and it helps young people get what they want, they're interested.
Yes, absolutely.
Here's what I found. As a mentor to young men, I find that if I can teach the young men, because my background, as you both know, is in part in personal growth, right? Life coaching. When I help young men discover who they are, their own unique virtues and values, and the behaviors that demonstrate them so they know how to go into the world being true to themselves, here's what I found. They naturally, organically, biologically want to be good young men. Like when I am doing a good job and I'm teaching their parents how to do a good job on letting their young men be true to themselves, they naturally want to provide what I like to call reciprocity. Authenticity leads to reciprocity. You help a young person, especially a young boy, discover who he is and really support him and find him right, which is what we call it in our work, where we find them right in what they're into. And once we support them in that, then we let them know that there's a little game at play here. We're happy to let you be you. And now that you're 13 or 12 or 14, we're asking you to contribute something to the family. We're not going to only be creating this big environment for you to discover who you are, which we're happy to help you do your whole life. We're also letting you know that a young man means that you're going to be delivering your resources, your mental wisdom, your emotional and physical wisdom and skills. We're asking for those virtues and values that you naturally have to come into the family. We need them.
Yeah.
We want the young man to feel needed. We need your skills. And at the same time, we're asking you to conform to the virtues and values of the home, because when you can abide by them, we can actually then get to the third step, which is then we can all be responsible for the things we need to do in this house with very little stress.
Yes.
And I am finding, and because, I teach stress management, as you know, so they all learn first, when I mentor a family, they all learn how to relax first.
Mhm.
so that if a young man is complaining about the rules, the parents learn not to interrupt, not to interject, not to do anything but to breathe and relax and be mindful in the moment. Let that young man really start revealing what he wants to say, because as you guys know, these are young men. They have one foot in childhood. They have another foot in young adulthood.
Mhm.
There's part of them saying, I just want to be a boy and play video games, and mom, please bring me my supper into my room,
Yes.
right? And then they get mad if the parents don't do it. And then on the other hand, they've got this other hormonal reality going, dude, you can bust out of here. Just steal the car keys, take the money, throw your parents out, and you could do this. You're ready to go.
Yes.
So they've got these two things going on, and I'm finding that they actually naturally want to contribute to the well-being of the family and the community. They want to be responsible as long as they are being heard. And then, as you would say, Warren, their purpose sort of discovers itself once they find out who they actually are, separate from the devices and all the social media.
Yes. Let me
So, please go ahead.
Yeah, let me segue from that extremely
Yeah.
important thing, which and sort of translate this into doing this as a family. So we all sort of have heard that family dinner nights are very helpful, and for the most part they are. But some family dinner nights can easily turn into family dinner nightmares. And so the question is how to make that family dinner night so that you are discovering everyone at that table and hearing everyone at that table. And so step number one is knowing how to get rid of the electronics at the table. Step number two is being able to have each person talk about what she or he has experienced during the day and how she or he has framed it, but making sure that when they do that, they have a limited amount of time, like 2 minutes to do that. You're going around the table, but before you go around to the second person, that you're asking one or two other people in the family to share what they heard Jimmy say or Joan say, and making sure that Jimmy or Joan feel heard and not just sort of like distorted, and staying with that until Jimmy or Joan says, yes, I think you really got it, thank you. And so that leaves everyone with feeling that her or his uniqueness, either of opinion or experience or way that they looked at the world that day, is heard, can be heard, and always will be heard. And that it's not just the parents hearing the children. It is the children also hearing the parents, and their brother and sister the same way. So what happens from that is what I call e pluribus unum. The children learn that there's one from many, as the Latin would go, and that yes, I am an individual. My parents discovered me. They're not discovering who I am. They're not just pressuring me to become somebody that I'm not. And at the same time, my requirement is to listen to my father's and my mother's and my sister's and my brother's perspective with equal amounts of respect. And then controversial topics can be brought into the table. And it's not a matter of dad or mom looking down on me when I say, I'd really like to have sex with every girl in my class except for 3. And the dad and mom go, oh my God, what a terrible thing to say. Because what is being respected is that anything that is being said is being heard well and shared without significant judgment, except when dad and mom come around and say, one of the ways I felt like that when I was a kid too, here's what I found was my shadow, was the shadow side of that, and here's, and so on. So that e pluribus unum, seeing the power of the family as a unit, and at the same time, the power of the family as a unit to discover everyone all the time, what their thinking is, and helping them be what Mark Gaffney calls their unique self. Right. And so that is something that we could not do generations ago. When I was seen to have gifts in writing, my father warned me. He said, Warren, only 1 out of 100 people who write get published. You can't find a publisher, Warren. You'll never find a wife. And so, don't get caught up in thinking you can be a writer, because that's not what reality is about. And so I had to fight to be a writer, because everything that I was encouraged to be was somebody who could make a living, not just for myself, but for my wife and my children, and that I wouldn't even have a family to love if I couldn't do that.
Yep. One of the things that I found, and I totally agree with you, I know you and I have talked about this before, like the family dinner is so critical. Parents tend to lay their trip on their sons and their children about their fears. I actually hear from young men that they can sense their parents' fear when they're not answering the questions right the way they want them to, because the parents are afraid of losing their status, where they're not going to maybe raise children who are going to be the doctor and the lawyer and all that kind of stuff. So they interject. Just like you teach parents and couples how to communicate, we actually have a 7-step process for parents and their children to use all together in the household. So especially it comes into play at that family dinner. And basically, it's all about respect, as you mentioned before. The method of family unity that I use is called the right way, and R stands for respect. Everything has to be founded on respect. And one of the behaviors that reveals respect is not interrupting.
Yeah.
And really letting everybody say what they have to say, because they're young people. They're trying to discover for themselves if they can't feel safe at the dinner table or in their home. How to kind of burp it out there. It's not going to be perfect, but it is really important, of course, that there's a way to communicate. And ultimately, it goes to the point where parents, the way I train parents, is to end everything they're saying with, here's what's true for me based on my experience.
Yeah, very good. I like that.
Where you need to, you oughta, you better. If you don't, that's no way to speak to anybody. And parents sometimes forget that their tween and teens children are emerging into adulthood.
Yes.
I wanted to say something to Ashanti, if I could now too, because Ashanti, we're talking about essentially, communicating with young people and rules and things like that. We're talking about the dinner table and how young people often feel overshadowed by their parents, right?
Yeah.
In the young men that you work with, how would you describe that for the young men? Like, how do they feel not heard, or how do they demonstrate it? How do they act it out? Or how do you see them not revealing themselves? I know at the Young Men's Weekend, all the people who are watching this video should know that Ashanti leads this ceremony called taking off the mask, which is, I'm just getting goosebumps saying it. It's so revealing. So knowing that you have some methods, how do you get the young men to come out? How do you find that they want to withdraw and not, speak up? How do you deal with all that? Or what do you see?
Yeah, a lot of things that I experienced in not only in my own home growing up was there's a lot of rules around, what happens here in this house stays in this house. And that goes for problems, drama, trauma, whatever. And I think that for a lot of young men who grew up in that kind of experience where it's like, okay, I can't talk about it to anybody out there. I can't talk about it to anybody at the house. Even though it happened here, they don't want to talk about it. Everyone's trying to pretend like it didn't happen. And what we end up seeing is like we just re-traumatize each other. And so what I know is that for a lot of the young people, it's like, look, I don't want to know your business. I don't need you to, because I could tell when I'm asking them questions, not trying to probe, but just trying to get to know, why is a really smart kid failing my class? Like, I was a teacher whenever Forward started. I was like, dude, you're so smart. I can see it in you. Why are you failing my class? Like, I'm here for you. And what I realized was that, well, man, and then they would say an answer. I knew it wasn't the complete answer. I'm like, tell me more. What you talking about? Tell you more. I'm like, well, say more about that, right? Like, when you try and just feed it out, once you've been mentoring for a while, you're missing something. Okay, you started at A, you got to G, now you're at Z. Can you help me fill in the middle? How did all this happen? And they think you're asking about them to tell you their personal business, and you're just like trying to say, well, look, I'm just trying to understand how to understand the story. The story is not working with my intuition. And so I'm not telling you that you're lying. Would you say I'm lying? No, I'm not saying you're lying. I'm saying my brain is trying to put the pieces together, but you went from A to G, and there's a lot of letters in between that I can't understand how it happened. And I think that it's about them recognizing, do you care really? Like, or are you just trying to just pretend? One, that's what a lot of students, you don't care about me. You only care about this check. And I had to tell them many times, I'm not here for this check, right? But I think that ultimately in their minds, what I think they're saying, without saying, they're saying, you don't really care about what I'm really going through. You just care about whether I did this silly homework or not. And I think that the layers of just helping young people recognize that I'm human too. And I think that it began to build those relationships. So I think that anytime we try and get deeper, is an opportunity for them to know, I'm not trying to make your life worse. I'm not trying to ask you so I can call Child Protective Services so that you get pulled out of your house. I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to know, why haven't I seen you in 5 days? And why are you so smart, but yet you're failing this really first level class in math? And I think that what I ended up recognizing from the young men when they talk about it, when they finally get to the place where they trust you. I had some young men, you know, even when they were in Ever Forward Club, as a club to talk about stuff, they would just lie. I mean, when I say lie, they would say I'm great when they're not great. And that, you may not call it a lie. You may say he's evading, but I tell them, look, some of you are just not telling the truth. Like on one-on-one, I know that they're going through stuff. When we get to a circle, everybody's perfect. And I think that what I try and help them do is recognize you're not alone, but it takes one person. It takes one of the young men to finally break free, you know? And I think that what ends up happening is just having that space. I'll tell you one quick story about two young men. We're in a circle. Young man A over here lost his father. His father died, right? He kind of blames himself because he was at basketball practice. His brothers were calling him like, hey, where are you? But he wasn't answering his phone because his phone was in the locker room. He gets back to his phone, 50 missed calls. Father had a heart attack. Father passed, right? Young man over here, father is abusive, like evil man, right? So this young man who never talks about his father, this man talks about his father all the time. I miss my father. I wish my father was here. So one day, it took 6 months. This first young man over here said, you know, I really hate my father. Now the young man who has a father, they both got father wounds, just different wounds. The young man who talks about his father all the time is like, how dare you talk about your father like that? Because he's projecting his stuff on that young man. Now I already know what's happening with this young man. I said, listen, hold on, slow down. Tell us about why you hate your father. And when he talks about the abuse and then being hungry and not having food in the house, and his father sit there eating McDonald's while he has no food, there's no food in the refrigerator for him and his sister. Like, it was that moment of helping young men recognize that I know my story and I got to give room to understand that there are different realities out there. And so what we've just been able to do is just slowly, lovingly and caringly knowing that every young man is not going to be ready day one. Some young men, when you first give them that space to be like, you might can talk about what I'm going through here, and they're just like, blah. And some young men, you could be with them 6 months and they're like, I'm fine. And sometimes we expect it to be magic cure. We expect it to be the blue pill, red pill. This is the magic answer. And some, it just takes time. And so I think that's what I've experienced in the work, is just knowing that, you know, even sometime on the weekend, sometimes we bring young men from Oakland to the weekend. It's a seed. Some of them, it's a harvest. It's like, whoa, I've been waiting for this all my life. Some, it's like, yeah, that was all right. And then later down the line, they're like, you remember that thing? Remember that giant's ladder? Remember that? And then they finally start putting seeds to, you know, they start sprouting. But sometimes we expect all young people to get it at the same time. And that's why our schools are failing. That's why our schools don't work so well, because it's like, sit here, listen to me, who I know everything, and I'm gonna give it to you all the same, and you all are supposed to get it at the same time. It may have worked one time, or may have worked at some point in our history. It doesn't work anymore like that. And so that's what I see.
Okay, so before we get too deep into what you're just talking about, like the giant's ladder, I want the viewers to know that we're talking about the Young Men's Ultimate Weekend. And one of the things we do there, because we put them through all these emotional, physical, mental, and even spiritual challenges, if I may use that term, when they're on like the giant rope ladder climbing thing, I mean, they're forced to overcome a lot of fears that they have. And I want to tie that into what's really lacking, because we're all talking about what parents could be doing better, or what needs young men have. I would be totally remiss in this conversation if I didn't talk about rite of passage, right? And when I say rite of passage, for me, I'm talking about rite of passage not just for young men, or young women for that matter, which someday hopefully our organization will be able to do. I'm talking about rite of passages for parents. I actually see a real need more than ever, I think, in history, where parents need a rite of passage as well. Before I address that, I want to get back to the rite of passage. Warren, the things that you were talking about at the family dinner, and for you, Ashanti, the thing you're talking about, how you interact with young men at school, I think the thing that's really missing is mentors. for hundreds of thousands of years. You know, families have had mentors. I like to call them, in fact, one of our key volunteers, Corey McKinley, likes to call them like relief pitchers. Like they can come into the family and they can bring a lot of relief. What they have in common is that they have a sort of, at least in our Young Men's Ultimate Weekend, they're trained on a very specific method called the Right Way for Family Unity. And they're devoted, they're trained, they know how to be with young men. And I think that some of the problems that are happening within the households is that everybody, children and adults alike, are under so much stress. And my specialty in chiropractic is stress management. So I know a lot of research on stress and how it affects the brain. Parents and young men and young people are under so much stress that the parents can't possibly fulfill the roles that their children need them to have now, because they're working and they're trying to take care of themselves and everything else, but their family. I think that it's not only fathers that are missing in our culture, because I know that's one of your main premises, which I totally agree with, Warren. I think men are missing. I think mentors are missing from our culture. And bringing back rite of passage, which is certainly something that I'm dedicated to, and hearing Ashanti address, is that even when young men come to the Young Men's Ultimate Weekend, some of them really get the big aha. Like I could take up the rest of the conversation talking about how many men will come to me 10 years later going, Doc, thank you so much. Ashanti made a key point that's important for parents to hear, which is this. When you have with your children, you have to relax around it, because they may not sprout that wisdom until 5 or 10 years later, where it comes into their head, either because they're so stressed out or because they don't have the brain bandwidth. That's a really, really key point you're making, Ashanti. I would love for you to take a moment, if you wouldn't mind, to talk about how, you know, at the culture at the Young Men's Weekend, where you've been around so many, you know, we have 5 or 6 dozen mentors for about 5 or 6 dozen young men. What's your experience there? How does it change the playing field for you being a teacher in a school or a nonprofit leader with young men? How does that setting maybe make it a little bit easier for you to get your message across?
What I realize is that at the weekend, you know, the men who go through their training to get ready are told this is all about the young men. And it's important for men who are wanting to be mentors to recognize we have to get ourselves out of the way. But the only way that a man really can be ready to be a mentor is if he's went and revisited his teenage self and recognized, oh yeah, this is how I was, right? Because I'm an adult, I got a job, I got a car, I got insurance, I'm a responsible adult. But what were you like when you didn't maybe have it all together? Or maybe you had it all together in high school too. I think it's like making sure that when we try and help mentors kind of get ready, and when I'm at the weekend especially, it's like sometimes there's a battle happening. The adult wants you to go do that, and you want to do this. Now, anybody who's ever raised teenagers or know about teenage young men, sometimes they're resisting just to resist. It has really no good reason. It's just I don't want to do what you're telling me to do, or I don't like how you told me to do it. So now I'm going to put my fist down, and now there's a battle, right? And so what's really been great for me is if I ever see a battle, I just take a minute, I watch it, I breathe, I'm trying to listen both sides. I'm like, oh, this is not going to go anywhere fast. So my job is to say, let me ask you a question. How do we want to resolve this? And I think that what I've learned just in school and how it not only helped me at the weekend being an educator, but it also helped me as an educator being a mentor, because some students, they're not looking for you to be their teacher. They just want you to be their friend. And I know some students who you could be absent, give a substitute, tell the students they have no homework. You can have a student, they'll make up their own homework. Now, that's one type of student. Then you can have a student where I could drive after work to that kid's house, deliver the homework to them. They still not doing the homework. So imagine all those different ranges of people and students you're dealing with. Well, my job is just to be a servant in that place. And so the mentors, it's about the young men. And I got to check myself in that moment all the time. Like, am I getting engaged? Am I letting myself get engaged? And so I think the work, when I work with teachers, I really work with teachers around this idea of your job is to teach a content. But if you care more about the subject that you're teaching than you do than the subjects who you're teaching, there's going to be a disconnect. And until teachers can recognize that, they're going to constantly be like, I know my subject, I'm the expert at this subject. And the kids are like, I don't care about that stupid subject. You know what I'm saying? You think you want, my life is I got way more stuff happening in my life than science, history, mathematics, social studies, whatever class you're teaching. But some kids, if you have a relationship with them, they will go to battle for you. Like they will come early, they'll stay late, they'll pick up boxes, they'll help you move out of your classroom. Like, I think it's about building relationships, and that's what it's all about. I think that's what a mentor is about, right? It's about building relationships. And I think that's what sometimes educators miss, and sometimes mentors miss it because they want to know everything. I've already been through this. I'm gonna tell you how to get through this. And the young person is like, slow down.
Here's one thing that I want to say about the mentors at YMUW is that most of those men have been initiated themselves as adult men.
Yeah,
they've gone through adult men rite of passage. That's a very powerful thing to have an initiated man mentoring young men. And one of the things about being a mentor, like the reason why we have a parenting workshop that's going on at the same time as the Young Men's Ultimate Weekend, it's not really a workshop, it's a rite of passage for the parents, because they have to learn to stop parenting so much. And they have to learn to start mentoring more. Like you said, getting into real relationship, Ashanti, that's the magic of the weekend, is the young men and the men get into a real relationship because the mentors don't have the same expectations that their parents have. So when parents can learn how to be more like a mentor and less like an all-doing parent, better relationship with their son. And they need, the reason why we do the rite of passage for the parents too is they need a formal letting go of their son as a boy and start respecting him as an intelligent young man. I want to ask you a question, Warren, because I know that you coach couples a lot, right? How much do you see in your work, you know, raising children becomes like a big factor in getting in the wedging them in their relationship? Because, you know, as you and I have talked about before, you know, there's natural biological differences that men and women have that they're supposed to have evolutionary wise so that they can raise well-rounded children, right? And I find that they both think sometimes that the other one's not nurturing. They're both nurturing, they just have different ways of nurturing.
Yes.
So how do you find that in your work with parents, and what might you offer, you know, parents who are watching, how your work could help them sort of see that the children, you know, are not doing well when their parents are fighting all the time?
Yes, you know, the family dinner night situation we talked about before is a way of getting the children to see that what's happening here is that everybody is being heard, and that the way that I can, and when children start learning that, they start applying that to kids at school, and they become more popular because everybody at school wants to be heard. Everyone, you know, wants their unique self to have a chance to sort of blossom. And so I think that's a really important way. I think second, I want to get back for a moment to your mentorship thing. The mentoring is so helpful to boys, and especially boys without who are more dad deprived rather than dad enriched, because when boys don't have a good male figure and a mentor to look up to, they start looking up to gang leaders, to drug dealers, because when boys, testosterone is not channeled constructively, it becomes channeled destructively. But there's another dimension to the mentor issue, which is one of the best things you can do for a boy, is to not only find him a mentor or multiple mentors, but also find that boy someone to mentor. The research shows that the boys who progress the most are the ones that have somebody to mentor, because let's say that boy is learning from his mentor that he should finish his homework or do something, you know, constructive like that. But then, and that, you know, he wants to please the mentor, great. But now he's mentoring somebody and he realizes if he doesn't do his homework, he might fail that course. And how will that look to the boy he's mentoring? That's not a very good example. And so the boy in mentor role begins to take on a mini parent role, and feels, and he knows he is needed. When boys feel needed, when men feel needed, that's when they blossom. So it's important to have them guided, and it's wonderful at the same time as that they're being guided, that they have somebody who is benefiting from their guidance, so they both can pay more attention to the mentor, because it's now serving a purpose of having them be more honored and somebody else in their care being helped. And so that's, I think, a really important way of doing that.
Thank you. I really need to include that more in my work. That's a brilliant point. And here's what we find at the Young Men's Ultimate Weekend. Parents will often call me and say, I'm worried, my son's only 13 and you have 20-year-olds there.
Yes, yes.
Is he gonna get his ass kicked?
Yes.
And I go, no, it's the exact opposite. It's just what you spoke to, Warren. I go, those young men scoop up those young dudes, because they'll be on the same team, because as Ashanti will tell you, we break up the young men into teams that have a certain balance of younger and older young men. Those young men are protected by those older young men, and they look up to them like they're gods.
Yes.
They ask them questions, and the young men, you're right, I didn't make that connection. They feel so needed and so worthy. It's beautiful to watch them. So thank you. That's a great point.
Yes.
And I want to get back to that other point about the relationship with the mom or the dad and raising their children. They both have the same desire.
Yes. Yes.
You know, and yet they have differences. How do you coach parents around that, and, you know, couples, if that comes up at all in your work?
Yes, it comes up all the time. The number one thing is that it's inside of the dad as to why he does the roughhousing, as to why he leaves his son or daughter alone at the school, and allows them to get into maybe a fight at a pickup basketball game. But dads don't feel that they're going to even be listened to about that. So, and they don't tend to get in touch with their feelings, because their feelings about what they're doing and why they're doing it are not going to be heard. So why even bring them up? And so the couple's communication process is basically saying, whenever somebody feels criticized, that the Achilles heel of all human beings is our inability to handle criticism from a loved one without becoming defensive. So the whole work that I do in the couples workshop is to have people meditate into an altered state of knowing that they're going to be loved to a greater degree when they provide a safe environment for their partner to express their feelings. So they're being trained to hear what they would normally feel defensive about, because it's a different style of parenting than they have. And when dad explains his style of parenting, that must be a criticism of the mother's style of parenting. And it might be a criticism of the mother's style of parenting, but the dad and the mom need to hear what is the rationale for that different style of parenting. I want to protect my son and not have him have to have all these peas before he has his ice cream because he had a bad day. Aren't you sensitive to what, the fact that that letting him just have the ice cream is more important than telling him you have to finish all your peas first? What type of insensitive person are you? Or maybe you just don't get this. And dad is saying, no, you don't get that. It's really important to be able to have him focus on his finishing those peas before he gets his ice cream, so he learns postponed gratification, so he feels better about himself because he can do things. Now, which is right? Both are right. And but the job of both parents, even if just one is more right than the other, is to hear out completely on 3 different levels. One is to share with the other person what you heard them say. Secondly is to ask them if there's anything that you distorted. Third is to ask them if there's anything that you missed. And then if they feel that there is nothing distorted and nothing missed, that's when they feel the environment is safe enough to answer the question, is there anything more that you want to add? And when they start feeling that the environment is so safe that I can add more, that's when they feel like this is, they feel themselves discovering feelings inside of themselves that they didn't even know that were inside of them, and thinking thoughts inside of themselves that they didn't even know they were thinking. And when kids see parents treat each other that way, they are learning a method of communication that's going to serve them well in school and serve them well with everyone that they meet, and even without knowing that even without being directly trained, except by things like the family dinner night, to do those things.
Here's what I'm finding that, I mean, I totally agree with you. Like I said, like, you know, we teach the parents and the young people the exact same 7-step communication process, which of course is very similar to what you teach too, because it's all about inclusion and respect. What I find parents will often say, they'll say, well, you know, Dr. Mark, like, then I'm letting my children run the house, you know? And what I've learned from one of my mentors, Ishak Adizes, is like, he defines the word authority as the ability to say yes and no. I tell parents, you don't lose your authority just by including them in the conversation. You now try to parent from a place of influence, which means that you say what's true for you. It may persuade them, it may not persuade them. At least they don't feel like you're beating them up with your standards, I guess, is what I want to say.
Yes.
And I totally appreciate what you're saying, because I really do feel that the children are learning how to be in relationship with women and men based on how their parents are behaving.
Mm-hmm.
And I think now more than ever in the world, and I mean this so sincerely, like I think more than ever, men and women need to learn how to work together more effectively, you know, and so they can run the world politically and economically, you know, based on love, generosity, and cooperation, and not the things that they're seeing now, which is mostly like hatred and greed and domination, things like that. I think it all begins when the children are observing their parents communicate.
Totally, totally. Before we end this, and I do have to go, I'd like.
I know time is one.
Oh.
Please go ahead.
I'd like to ask Ashanti, one of the most brilliant things that I think you do that is really helpful for parents to get a little summary of is what you do with the masks, because behind that what you do is the core to helping boys not feel so alone and isolated in their feelings. Could you maybe share that?
You know, the activity was started for that documentary, The Mask You Live In. And what they had said to us was, we want to come film where you're doing the work. I said, well, you should go to our club that's doing really well. And they were like, well, where are you? I said, well, our club, they don't talk about stuff. We're not there yet. They were like, well, I want to see that in action. I'm like, well, you're going to see resistance. And so what we tell parents when we do the work now is like, I didn't know it was going to work. I just tried it. It was like giving people a space to speak without saying words. It's one picture, 6 words. There's a picture, which is the mask, which is an image. Then there's 3 words on the front, which are the 3 things that we let people see about us. What are the 3 qualities or characteristics we gladly let people see? And then there's the back. There's 3 things that we normally don't let people see. And what those young men did is they wrote those things, they balled up. It wasn't 3 back then, it was just how many ever you have. They balled them up, they threw them at each other. They picked up a random piece of paper after they had the little fight with the papers because they loved that. And then when they realized they were picking up a piece of paper, they're like, well, who's it? Which one is whose? Because they were all no names on them. And when you open it, it's this idea that, wow, like there's more going on with people in this room that I would have thought, because everybody on the outside is cool and fun and they got it all put together. And, you know, with families, you know, if you have a small family, it's hard to know. You're probably going to know whose is whose. But what if you gave your family a chance to say, what if we just ask about what are some things that we don't know about each other? What are some things that you know that you don't know just by looking at me? Because, and then anybody raising teenage boys knows that, you know, I'm good, I'm cool, I'm fine. Could be, I'm good, I'm cool, I'm fine. And those are also words of covering for so many different things, right? So I think when Mark, when you talk about parents, he's so different, he's so reserved. Well, how open are you about things that you're going through, right? And so parents have, I think, as much of a responsibility too, to like teach our kids how to deal with struggles and challenges. But if I'm perfect as the adult, and I'm trying to make you my perfect specimen of me, therefore, every mistake you make, I'm trying to cover it and catch it and make you not make mistakes. How do they ever learn as adults how to deal with challenges and mistakes? So that's the work we do with parents. And the movement is called the Million Mask Movement. So, you know, people can go online and make a mask. It's go to 100kmasks.com and they can make a mask. It's digital now. They don't have to have a piece of paper. They can go online, make a mask, have their kids make a mask, and then go in and talk about the other masks that are in that gallery.
Yes.
But what they'll see really quick is that, oh wow, we're not alone. Whether you're 45 or you're 14 or you're in the 4th grade, like there is like really amazing similarities that happen. But since we don't talk about it, we just see what people are letting us see.
Yes, and that is important for women, but it is crucial for boys and men, because the essence of what masculinity is about is living behind that mask, and so that you can perform and be willing to die rather than acknowledge the fears that you had. The knight, the soldier, could not talk about his fears, otherwise it would bring out everybody else's fears. And your job in boot camp was to learn, no matter what you were called, your job was to stomach those feelings and move on and be tough, because the military machine did not benefit from the squeaky wheel. It benefited from everybody just doing what they needed to do, play their role, and if they died, they died. And talking about your feelings was totally dysfunctional. Now, for the first time in world history, we are making an evolutionary shift to allow our sons, and especially, to talk about their feelings and fears with each other, and seeing what is behind that mask of masculinity. And that's what you introduce boys to, that is so valuable. The only caveat is that it must be confidential, and everybody has to agree that this stays in this room with this group. Otherwise, the boys are afraid they'll be laughed at outside of the group.
Yep.
And so, but it's a huge contribution that you're making with that experience.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been blessed to watch that at the Young Men's Ultimate Weekend. It's pretty outrageous event. So yes, I'm with Warren on that, dude. That's a great ceremony that you've created. As we're winding down, I kind of have one last question and then one sort of bigger space for you to say your last words, but this is really important to me and we could talk for hours about this. We all know the research is so clear that if children grow up in an environment that's not really conducive to their physical, mental, emotional, spiritual health, that they're going to have a lot of problems, and they're going to act them out in all sorts of ways that may take them their whole life to work through. And I know I'm generalizing, and I know it fits a mold. And I appreciate how on this call so far, this conversation, we're sort of taking good care of, I think, of parents and their children. We're trying to give them a lot. The one thing I'd want to say about young men who grow up in an environment that is not really geared towards understanding them and helping them, individuate out into the world, is that if they're going through a hard time in that house, I know that they're going to act out in really weird ways. And we all know on this call, like, those weird ways are very disrespectful. They can do that great withdrawal. They can really do something really violent and anything in between, but they're not going to care about the people in the family and maybe their community, and they're not going to really want to cooperate, right? I find that those young men, they need to have, as we've talked about before, the mentors, the right people in their life to help them get through it. What would you say, like, the culture needs to do? I feel like this is a cultural issue. When I started teaching parents 20 years ago about how to be better parents and how to have better relationships, I would often find myself, wanting to make them wrong, because I know I made all the same mistakes they did, and I always beat myself up for them. Mm-hmm. And then I kind of discovered it after I did a deep dive about when did stress in the family actually begin? And it's like thousands of years ago. I realized, like, it's really a cultural issue, way more than, I think, a parental issue. So I'd love for you to just talk for a moment about, like, how the culture could do better helping parents raise their children, because it seems like we're at a really interesting time in history now where we've gone through so many evolutions: the agricultural evolution, the industrial evolution or revolution, the educational revolution, all these things that have kind of made it hard for parents and their children to keep it together because they're always trying to keep up with the Joneses. And now we have the technological revolution, which is really kind of isolating everybody. To me, it's a cultural issue. We haven't been giving parents a good roadmap on how to get through all this stuff. So I'm just curious as to how you relate to that. What are you seeing out there as far as a cultural, it's monkey see, monkey do. Parenting is still monkey see, monkey do. And it seems like the adult monkeys are not doing a great job modeling for the young monkeys how to do this in a real respectful way.
Yeah. Ashanti, you want to start out or you want me to start out?
Yeah, can you start out? Can you start out? Yeah.
Yeah, it's such an important question. There's so many things that can be done. First of all, we have to call forth a new type of purpose in men. In the past, we had the purpose of killing and being killed at war. Now we have the potential for the purpose of loving and being loved at home, of creating father warriors, a new type of warrior, a warrior of love, a warrior who learns, and the schools need to cooperate and work with that. First, second, third grade, we need to be teaching boys and girls communication skills, how to hear each other. We have to see that behind every bully is a vulnerable soul who's bullying because he feels so insecure underneath, and hear that bully's vulnerability and hear the vulnerabilities of everybody so uniquely in that classroom, so that we're training boys not to be disconnected from their emotions when they're young, but to be able to connect and express and see that courage to express and be vulnerable as a new type of courage. To do that, we need to be training teachers to be able to do that. Now it's considered progressive to say the future is female, to tell boys to take, when they're in high school, that sex is bad, and that if you initiate with a girl too quickly, you could be a sexual harasser or a date rapist. If you don't initiate quickly enough, the boys find out, they'll be called a wimp. And so, and we tell boys everything that they can and do badly, as opposed to say, girls, boys, let's share the risk of rejection, so that you both learn how to take risks, and also you both experience how fearful it is to try to reach out to somebody that might reject you, and what that's about. So we have to make sure that the schools hire as many male teachers as female teachers, especially in elementary school, because that's so crucial for especially a boy who goes from a female mother-only home to an all-female adult school. The boy, and we say, is it a surprise that this boy is seeking a destructive male role model to get respect from, rather than a male role model that's constructive? So we have to revamp our schools. We have to have I've been talking with the White House about developing a father warrior program and about developing a male teacher corps. That's the current updated version of the Peace Corps, that gets men to be able to go into teaching for a couple of years in exchange for a full scholarship to be trained as a teacher, and then you pay back society by being a male teacher. It's so important that the male teachers not just be men like me. I'm sort of a nurturer connector type of male, but boys need not just nurturer connector type of males. They need traditional males as well. So no matter who your son is and what his core personality is, he has somebody that he can look up to that is somewhat honoring of his personality and his unique traits. And so these are just a couple of the multiple things that we need to be doing. Churches need to be having ministers speak out to the community, that their congregation, about the importance of fathers. We need, especially in the Black community, if we say Black Lives Matter, we have to focus on Black dads mattering. There is no way, shape, or form that we can say that we care about Black lives if we don't put an emphasis on the importance of inspiring Black dads to be involved, educating Black dads as to what they contribute and why there is such dysfunction in so many Black families, because the common denominator of 73% of Black families is a lack of father involvement. And that needs to change if we really are genuine about saying Black Lives Matter. So those are just a few of many, many things that, and I hope in the Boy Crisis book, there's just hundreds of things. I promised myself in doing the research for that book that I would never talk about a problem without creating a solution on both the family level, the school level, the church level, and the community level, like Boy Scouts and Cub Scouts, and then also on the national and state level.
Beautiful.
Yeah, thank you for bringing up the Black Lives Matter piece. I think that fathers are necessary all over. I think our jails are full of men. 94% of people in prison are men. And so statistically, either men are bad, or it starts when they're boys, when they're told these behaviors that then causes the adult existence not to work. And so one of the things that when you asked about the parents, Mark, one of the things I thought about was, and I don't know where I read it or heard it, but one of the contexts that I try and hold with parents is that your child does not belong to you. And I think oftentimes parents want their child to be a specimen of themselves. And so instead of helping the child develop who they are, you know, I taught in India and I've taught in lots of different communities, but there are some families where if you're not a doctor, lawyer, or engineer, you're nobody. Yep. And for a child to believe that pressure and to believe those type of things, and for some, like when you see a child who gets to just explore the things that they're excited about, whether it's music, art, finger painting, slime. I mean, there's a teenage girl who's a millionaire because her parents let her make slime in the tub. Like you want to take our tub and do what with? But what if their parents are like, no, you don't got to mess up our tub with this slimy stuff? Like, how amazing is this? She's not even a teenager. She's actually younger than a teenager. How amazing that she got to like invest in time and energy and things that she was excited about, and her parents supported her along that journey. And I think that if parents can recognize that their role is to help nurture this new life to be what they were born to be, as opposed to make it into what would make us look good or parents that look good, I think we could change a lot. And I think that one of the things that in our community, I tell our young men, I mean, the way we're going to make, like, if a community has a lack of fathering, then the boys don't know how to be fathers. And I tell my young men, look, if you're going to be involving yourself in having sex, you should make sure you're ready to become a father, right? And in their minds, they think that their game is so good, they ain't got to ever worry. And then all of a sudden they're like, I don't know what happened. Well, yeah, it's happening. It's biology. Welcome to the world. And you should take that class. You should have stayed in class. But ultimately, we have work to do, and we have work to do in so many ways but I think that what's exciting is that these lights are coming on and people are coming awake, and we recognize that we have a lot of work to do, that we've been maybe ignoring some things for so long. I think when the documentary came out, it began to open some doors. When these movements came out, began to open some eyes. And now we have a time in our world, in our country, that we have some work to do to make sure that we're going to keep going. And so I'll stop there, but yeah, thank you for the question.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Warren, please go ahead.
Let me just share something that just ties so perfectly into that. I want to share a little story about what happened with me and my father. I was mentioning that he was so clear that I shouldn't be a writer because of the fear that I wouldn't be able to make enough money to protect a family. And later, when I started training people to do things in psychology, my father came out and visited me, and for 3 days, he didn't say a single word about anything that I did. And so he was talking about himself, other things. And so I said, Dad, and I pointed that out to him, and he long pause. And he said, well, I didn't want to ruin our relationship. And I go, Dad, our relationship involves both people talking about themselves and having some curiosity about each other. Long pause. Are you sure you want me to open that door? Tell me what you're thinking and feeling, because it's inside of you and I want to know about it. Okay. I think that teaching psychology like you do is ruining the lives of millions of people. And I said, Dad, tell me, what do you mean by ruining the lives? He said, what you're training people to do is to discover what they want to do. Life is not about, particularly for a man or a woman, about what they want to do. It's about what they have to do, what they need to do, what they feel obligated to do. That's when you become a man, Warren, when you give up what you want and you get what you need. Well, I sat on that for a few weeks. And then one of the next conversations I had with my dad is I said, Dad, your generation worked so hard and so inventively and creatively that you freed us to be able to not just do what we have to do, but to have enough survival mastered to be able, for the first time in history, to do what we want to do. So honor yourself for creating that freedom for me, rather than criticizing me for not being an imitation of you. You've allowed me to make contributions in a way that's unique for me. Thank you, Dad. Please honor yourself from that, with that. And that really had a huge, deep impact on our relationship. My father felt honored as opposed to fearful that he was not doing his job as a dad. And so sort of compounding what you're saying, Ashanti, I want every father and mother to hear that transition that has been created by you, who have created enough means for survival to be able to support your children, to not survive in such a way that was true for generations before. But now we have women helping out with the economic process. We have fewer children. We have many things available to us that we could allow us to survive and give us more freedom to discover who we want to be and who we can be.
Wow. What a great story. And it really supports everything that we've been talking about, which is like, parents don't have to lose their authority or their influence. If they create a space that's safe and secure for those young men to find their way and be proud of that, assuming it's something to be proud of, which most things are,
Yes.
that young men do, they're going to end up like you did and like I did and even like Shanti did, you know, where he got to do. I'm convinced of this after working with young men for 20 years now, thousands of them. When mentors like the three of us, when parents, who I know there's many in the world, really know how to raise their sons that are respectful and allow them to be themselves, like I said earlier, they'll naturally want to contribute. I really believe this in my heart and in my head. That's when the world is going to finally be a safe and prosperous place for everybody without discrimination towards anybody.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's more important now than ever that we all work together to help families make it, because if they can make it through this tough time, then I think the world has a good chance of doing a good job integrating technology, which is coming in fast and hard, you know, with the old school ways, because we need to help them transition right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that it can go well, like you were saying, Ashanti, like there's been doors are opening, eyes are opening. So I'm praying that it really opens that way. I'd like to end by asking each one of you in 1 minute or less, if you can, to really give one last bit of insight or wisdom or prayer, blessing, ceremony, anything that you would like to say about how you think our culture could do a better job helping families make it through this outrageous transition from old way to new way. Any one of you, feel free at any time. It's a big question. It's good to breathe. Take it in, really. I'd love for you to give your best to that.
I would say that the best way we can do that is realizing that it is not progressive to focus only on empowering women. It is progressive to understand that we're all in the same family boat. And when only one sex wins, both sexes lose. We need to see it as progressive, of having compassion that is extended to males, and to understand that men earning money was not about male power. It was about men being willing to sacrifice their lives for their children, for their family, to protect women, to be there for women. And it's now time for us to spend the next 50 years doing what we did for the last 50 years. The last 50 years, we've really tried to understand and have compassion for women. Let's continue that while we start studying how boys and men were trained and socialized, and having that same compassion for men and boys. And so that we are no longer talking about being human by only being empathetic to one sex.
Thank you.
You know, there's a quote that we use in our work that says, the longest distance that most people travel is the 18 inches between their head and their heart. And we add this little part that says, but most people get stuck in their heads. And in our work, we're asking people all over the world, all over in our adults, young people, to take a journey from your head to your heart. And I think that when you take that journey to recognize that you are way more than what anybody could ever see on the outside. And the only way that we're going to get to that place where we can recognize that there's not only more to us, but there's more to people around us, is if we get out of our heads overthinking it and we get into our hearts so we can feel it and recognize that we're all human and that humans have full permission to feel regardless of the body you were born into or the gender that you identify with, that we all feel. And the more we give men in our communities permission to feel safely and not feel ashamed about it. Like, you know, this is National Domestic Violence Prevention Month. Why are we still talking about this topic? Because men are still not getting the support they need, or when I say the support, but they're not getting the we can say the training or the support. They're not getting the support they need to deal with their emotions in healthy ways. So they take it out in ways that are erupting, and they're erupting all the time, as we hear in so many sad stories. So that's what I would say is taking the journey from the head to the heart so we can lead from love. I think our world needs a lot more love. So I'm complete with that.
Amen, 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 amen. Here's what I would say, you know, just answering my own question, because I was wondering, what am I going to say? And I heard you both talking, saying really great things. Here's one of the things that came up for me. This concept that I learned early on, you know, back in the day when I was late teenager, early 20s, I was studying a lot of Eastern philosophy, and I learned and I feel like one of the things that this culture needs to teach all humans is the principle of both and, meaning this. Right now we're watching, especially in the political world, such extreme polarization, which then seems to lead to all this isolation that I'm right, they're not. You know, this either or world that I was brought up in. Either you're happy or you're not. You know, either you agree or you disagree. And what I'm learning in my own world, and have done a good job now teaching others, is to learn to relax. I mean, literally relax when people are disagreeing with you and have a polar opposite point of view, that you can actually relax to it and respect it, even while disagreeing with it. If we could train our culture to learn to relax and respect what's actually being spoken to you without trying to interject or interrupt, and just stay relaxed, you'll probably hear way better what they're saying, even if you still disagree. And I believe that that will then lead to at least some common courtesy, where everybody feels gallant or brave enough or courageous enough to say what's true, and then not be beaten up for that. Because we need, and I'll end with this, we need to have people who get that everybody has distinctions amongst each other, amongst themselves and each other, but it doesn't mean we're different. Science has proven what, you know, spiritual teachers have taught for a long time. Like, we actually all literally came from one reality, however you would describe that or call that. So we can be distinct, but we're not really different. And if somehow we could get that into the culture where we start from this place of equal respect, because we're all equally worthy of the highest regard, that's my prayer. That's what I'm seeing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you for pulling this together. And thank you mostly, Mark, for your extraordinary Young Men's Ultimate Weekend and for caring about taking it over in a way that is not bureaucratically stopping you from making progress and getting out there and bringing real life experiences to men and boys that have transformative effects on their lives. And you for doing the same, Ashanti. You've both made extraordinary contributions to young men in the next generation.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Mark. You know, when I was looking to become a mentor, learning what I was trying to do ever forward, you know, your mentor training is a kickoff of a lot of the work. That was 2008. So 12 plus 13 years I've been running in this journey with you. So I'm excited for the next steps. And Warren, you know, we've had a chance to be in a couple of amazing spaces together. So thank you. And thank you for just continuing to have a heart for men. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So thank you all viewers for watching. Again, you know, if you want to get in touch with us, maybe Warren, if you want to tell people the best way to reach you, please take a moment to do that.
Yes, if you just remember my name, Warren Farrell, my website will come up, warrenfarrell.com. I couldn't remember anything more difficult. And so and then if you're interested in the boy crisis, is the least expensive place to get it is on Amazon, but the best, many people find that listening to it on Audible is very helpful for them when they're taking a car trip. They don't have to waste their time. And so, and they can hear myself and John Gray talk about it. And so I'd say those are two ways I can make contributions. I respond to every single email I get. So if you email me at warren@warrenfarrell.com, you will get a response.
Beautiful. How about for you, Ashanti?
Yeah, you can find Ever Forward Club at everforwardclub.org, everforwardclub.org, or on social media, it's at everforwardclub. And so I'm the social media guy, I'm the janitor, I do it all. So send us a message and somebody on our team will get back to you. But thank you for, thank you. And if you want to make a mask, you can go to 100kmasks.com. And you can find that on our website also, so that you can be a part of the movement of helping people realize they're not alone. So thank you.
If you want to find out more about the Young Men's Ultimate Weekend, you can contact us at info@ymuw.org. You can call 800-719-9302. If you want to find out more about the work that I'm doing with families, then you can go to challengingteenagesons.com. So thank you, fellas. Great to hang out with you this way. I wish we could be in our, one of our living rooms, but this really fulfilled my desire to just have us share wisdom, and hopefully it'll be of benefit to families and young men. So thank you all for watching, and please continue to stay tuned to all the videos that YMUW puts out so you can learn more about how to have better relationships with your spouses and your sons.
Great.
Thank you.
Good night.